Okay, so I think the last time we've come to this point where the Gnostic secret societies, and we've gone through them, we've touched on this, what we've referred to as a family tree of Gnostic secret societies, had been flourishing and overtaking gradually Europe, the United States, through first of all having their stronghold within the Catholic Church, then also the Protestant Church, but within all that, gaining their stronghold within banking, within education, all the while pushing Christianity further to the sidelines and distorting its meaning, truncating the gospel, rendering it irrelevant to society, especially relevant to science. And in the meanwhile, they're furthering their scientific agenda, the Gnostic secret societies, which have always, as a mystery religion since ancient Sumer, or what I've been referring to as Babel system, they have always branded themselves. Satan has always branded himself as the science-friendly religion. And just as a last point of view, that's been made possible by the fact that, or especially that illusion has made itself possible by the fact that ultimately Babel system is premised on the idea not of a personal God, but of an impersonal God, like an emanating intelligence life force. And through that, polytheism. But ultimately, because you're talking about a life force that can be hacked or controlled or manipulated in some way in a dualistic framework, then that's where you're looking at what seems to have been Satan's great deception of taking certain truths about nature, about the duality of physical laws, vibration dynamics, polarity, things that we indeed find in nature, positive, negative charge, etc., and conflating that with a theism or a pantheism that is dualistic and that ultimately can't make sense of a free and personal supreme being, as the Judeo-Christian tradition can. So I believe we've reached the point in our coverage of this meta history where I was going to get into talking about the Masonic intrigues of the 20th century and how they're seeing now. We have guys like Albert Pike, the Sovereign Grand Master of Masonry.
That's the secret.
And then we also have
teachings of all ages. That Manly P. Hall.
Yeah, well, that was Manly P. Hall. Albert Pike wrote the Masonic Bible, Morals and Dogma. And what's just so interesting is that, so we have the promise of the 20th century is on the horizon. This is the late 1800s. And Albert Pike is positioning his troops, his hierarchy, the Masonic hierarchy of Illuminism, to go after this ether. I'm not sure if last time I shared the quote or not, but there's basically this quote from Albert Pike in Morals and Dogma where he's essentially saying we have got to get a handle on science, on industry. We have got to consolidate our grasp on all of it, secretize it, and be the ones who are in charge of the cutting edge of science so that our rulership is complete. And because that's always how it's gone with the Gnostic secret societies, to have the scepter of what they call the scepter of vibration, or the cutting edge on science, is to also have the key to ruling every other aspect of society, invention, every other aspect of scientific and civil progress, because it's all interconnected. And so what's so fascinating about this year, 1871, when he published Morals and Dogma, and he's saying is that very same year, in 1871,
corporation.
another
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's actually true too. That's a great connection. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on in 1871. But another thing that's going on in 1871, at that same time that Morals and Dogma was published, there was another book that was published that was bound to have, just like Morals and Dogma, its major impact on the 20th century and dictate its course, dictate Masonic activity and intrigues, and what we will end up finding eventuates in the space age. That was a book called The Coming Race by Edward Bulwer Lytton, the Rosicrucian. It was about this vril, which was just another name, a Rosicrucian term for the ether, the life force. And this book, The Coming Race, actually written by, and Edward Bulwer Lytton was a adept Rosicrucian Mason. This book was written in the safe form of a fiction. So, like many things that are dished out today, oh, it's just a movie, it's just fiction. In that case, it was just a novel. But the people who would end up reading that book knew it wasn't just a novel, it was an allegory for their belief system. And I wasn't prepared to summarize it, but I'll just give it a hack here. The book was basically about a man who, the protagonist finds himself lost in an underground realm and through a mine shaft, and stumbles upon this advanced underworld or city, with the likes of Egyptian architecture. And he meets this race called the Vrilya, and he comes to find out that they basically adopt him as his pet. And he comes to find out their history, their prehistory, that they descend from an ancient tribe called the Ana, which is a head nod to the Anunnaki, Sumer's Anunnaki, and to the Anu, the sons of Anu. And but what he's struck by is their advanced technology, their flight, their power of flight, their power of telepathy. Everything is powered by the vril, or this etheric force, this life force. And so, in the same way that Albert Pike was sounding the trumpet and saying, we need to go after the ether, this is our 20th century focus, so also was Edward Bulwer Lytton. And this is going to be the preoccupation that gives rise to the Nazi Party, that gives rise to the space age. Actually, I'm going to take a step back, a major step back. This is what's going to give rise to Aleister Crowley, Britain's. In fact, let me take a big step back and open here with a statement that's going to shock people, but I'm going to walk you all through it. This would upset a lot of people. The fact is that every single base ingredient that went into fomenting Nazism in terms of their socio-political methods, including the public propaganda, the structure of their internal parties, their layers within layers of secrecy, including their cosmology, their actual, pagan Babel's cosmology that drove them. They're all very specific ingredients. I've enumerated them. I end up going through them in my book. And I have been astonished to find that every single one of these specific ingredients goes back to Illuminized Freemasonry. There isn't a single ingredient that went into Nazism that can't be traced in very concrete, detailed terms to what we call Illuminized Freemasonry. In fact, I was just thinking the other day, you mentioned you were when we referred to Morals and Dogma, people tend to recognize that, Morals and Dogma, written by Albert Pike. What's amazing is he wrote a book, another Bible of, if you will, of the Masonic counterfeit, over 600 pages, called Worship of the Indo-Aryan Deities. And it was all about their bloodline. It was all about this so-called glorious heritage of the Aryan people, which traces back to the Vedas, to Tibet, well, really to all of the glorified ancient empires of the pagan Babel archetype. It goes back to the idea that they were ultimately descended from Enki, who in their telling, in their account, is the herified serpent of
Gotcha.
Eden, the Gnostic serpent. And this goes back to the Gnostic tradition that there was a special race sired by Cain. It's an anti-biblical account because they don't accept the Bible's account. They say that Cain was maligned. They say that Cain was not the son of Adam and Eve. He was the son of Eve and the serpent Enki, and that he was especially endowed genetically to be a special to sire a special race of serpentine humans or godlike humans, set apart from the ordinary race and genetically bred to rule over them. And so that's really what we're looking at with the Aryan bloodline prehistory. And they trace it all the way down through the different empires, which they've all noted had blonde hair and blue eyes. So they have their reason. Again, Nazism doesn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Publicly, it seems to come out of nowhere. But it was always the secretive doctrine within the high grade of Masonry or all of the Gnostic secret societies and within the Merovingian bloodline of Europe's 33 royal families.
I have a question.
So
Hopefully it doesn't derail too much, but I've heard there's kind of like, the National Treasure or that series of books that alludes to the fact that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were together and had a bloodline. Does that somehow factor into that ideology? Is that a different road?
Absolutely. Because the Gnostics, just as they rejected the entire biblical narrative about the genealogies, they also rejected the Bible's genealogy on Jesus. And the story is, John the Baptist, Jesus, they were one of us. And those Christians like Peter, in the Catholic Church, and those were all just a bunch of imposters who stole true Christianity. That's their claim. And so their claim is that Jesus sired what they call the Dionysian bloodline, or that Jesus was in this line of Cain, and that he was an adept called the Melchizedek of what they called the Melchizedek priesthood, not to be confused with the biblical meaning of that term, because they change all of the biblical meanings to their narration. And yes, so Jesus is supposedly part of this supposedly in their view, part of this Anunnaki bloodline, and is the fountainhead of the Merovingian bloodline.
So he's just,
and that is why Hitler,
he's in the line of the story you just told, the bloodline that's been going on. He's in there, and Mary Magdalene was the furthering of that particular moment in time. Yeah, gotcha.
Right. Yeah. And so, anyways, what's just so interesting about this is also that this is how Hitler got started. A young, struggling artist in Vienna. One day he walks into a museum to escape the rain, and he overhears the tour guide talking about the spear of destiny, which was in a case. Supposedly the spear that pierced Christ's side, that was endowed with holy blood. This is the Holy Grail legend. And that whoever has it will rule. Well, when Hitler became chancellor in 1933, he ended up parading through the streets with that. And he felt that was, but anyways, that's all. And so they also have their narrative of Jesus having holy blood, but completely different from the Christian idea or the biblical idea. It's about their exclusive Anunnaki bloodline is how they see it. All right. So going back, let me see. I said I was going to take a step back some time ago. Yes. And so I said, all of these ingredients were actually from high Freemasonry. And, okay, so I cranked out some crudely written notes here, so that I can stay on track. And so I'll just go ahead and read them for you. And what were the vital ingredients to the advent of Nazism, which in fact came from this Masonic, this ancient Gnostic, this ancient Sumerian tradition? Well, there are the philosophical ingredients. One called Babylonianism. And if you could, maybe at the end, remind me to go back to the Aleister Crowley
Okay.
story and make a connection there. Okay. So, the philosophical ingredients. One was it was this idea that was fomenting in the early 20th century called pan-Babylonianism. We see it fomenting now through the likes of ancient astronaut theory, the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, where the basic claim is this: Genesis. It's the basic
Okay.
claim
Yeah.
of the Enuma Elish. They're saying that Genesis, the biblical record, is invalid, and rather Sumer's creation account and flood story, the
Yeah.
Enuma Elish, is the rightful one.
Which is really
That which
chaotic and
glorifies the
violent
serpent.
and wild, right? Like the Enuma Elish is pretty hectic in its, or I guess it's kind of like the idea of the masculine and the feminine, and then out of the chaos,
Yes, it's very allegorical.
comes order.
Yeah, right. It's very allegorically speaking to the system of this etheric life force, this
Yes.
primordial, impersonal life force, fire, water, Tiamat the dragon. All of that chaos actually has a double meaning to it, and it's the likes of Nimrod, who are the high initiates, or Marduk in that case, is who bring order to it, order out of the chaos, and who subdue the serpent, the dragon, and so anyways. But what's really at the premise of all of this is this idea that of what they called polygenism. Okay, so in this narrative, humans in this narrative, I got to read my own writing. The lot of ordinary humans were genetically created by the gods to be a slave labor force. And that's where we find this idea called polygenism. I've never been sure how to pronounce it. I've always read it. Polygenism, the idea that different human races were seeded by different deities. Some deemed superior to others based on their genetic source and better equipped with intelligence and strength to rule over the vast majority of others. The Cainite bloodline, in other words. Hence the emphasis on maintaining royal bloodlines through arranged marriages. This, by the way, becomes known as the enterprise of guided evolution. This is going to become huge for the Nazis and the space age masonry. Guided evolution. In this narrative, the Sumerian god Enki, the serpent and sea lord of many cultural names, Oannes, Dagon, possibly the Aztec Quetzalcoatl or the Mayan Kukulkan, is deified as a hero and fertility god. Opposite of the Hebrew biblical cosmology, he is praised for having endowed his priesthood and lineage of select humans with not only the secrets of illumination and math, science, civilization, geometry, sacred architecture, etc., and all in a consolidating priesthood, but also the blueprints for the ark to escape the great flood. So that story is reversed too. It's Enki. Okay, so in this narrative, Enki's rival god, the other deity named Enlil, is the antagonistic god towards humans, and he sent the great flood to do away with humans completely. And then the Gnostics will end up saying, oh yeah, that was the biblical God, Jehovah. And so we're telling you the real story on Jehovah. That's their claim. The Gnostic tradition claims that this villainous God Enlil is none other than Jehovah, the demiurge God of Abraham and the Israelite people, and adherents of the Judeo-Christian narrative. He is reputed in this belief system as the suppressor of human progress and learning. So you can already see in this logic, or how this logic will find its logical culmination in the Holocaust-level anti-Semitism.
And why all those nations throughout the Bible would have come against Israel based off of these narratives that this other God is the bad guy. Jehovah, he's the bad guy, and we've got the rightful thing. And then how devastating it would have been, those victories you read about in the Bible, when it's like, when they do have a great victory, then like everybody in the area starts to fear this, like Yahweh is the Lord. They start to say like,
right.
Because of these.
They start to say he likes to rule by fear and terror. They call him the original.
Gotcha.
They make him out to be the original terrorist. But there's a reason that when God, from the very foundation where he starts to disseminate the Bible publicly at Sinai, he does so publicly. He's creating a public movement of Scripture and the record of Scripture that will build over time and end with the world acknowledging, wow, God really was doing right by us. He was the one getting rid of the oppressor. That's the heartbeat of the Psalms. Anyway, and the book of Isaiah. Okay, so number 4, going back to the Nazi ingredients. In this I really should say Babel's narrative. In this narrative of Babel, the Sumerian gods aren't merely extraterrestrial, they are extra-dimensional, possessing super-physical bodies that can shapeshift or somehow travel into higher planes of existence. Outer space and the starry abode is itself regarded as being a supernatural domain, the sacred realm of the gods. This is going to be a huge thread in NASA. For Babel's Sun and Serpent Mystery School, the elite priesthood of its bloodlines, that is, an ancient and long-term goal was established accordingly. In this idea of guided evolution, guided by their gods, genetically and otherwise, the hope was to become more like the Sumerian gods in the way of travel to the stars and planets.
Interesting.
So we're seeing a goal there begin to form, that when the technology comes of age, that's where this is going. We're going to the stars, and it's going to be our exclusive territory, say the bloodlines. And when that time comes, we will find that this explains a lot about why NASA and the CIA's most exclusive research and development programs turned out the way they did. However, all of these vital worldview ingredients were astir in pre-Nazi Germany amongst the intelligentsia, the Masonic intelligentsia there. And in combination with the philosophical ingredients were the socio-political ones. Now let's talk a little bit about the socio-political ingredients. And let me just say, by the way, everything I just said, you'll find this in Albert Pike's Indo-Aryan worship of the gods. He's even talking about the ancient bloodline having its origin. Catch this. This is very important. In the Aldebaran star systems and the Sirius star systems. This is something we're going to find echoed today a lot on Ancient Aliens. It's something we're going to find was key to Aleister Crowley. It's something that was key to the early Vril Society, the Masonic Society of Nazism. Aldebaran, Sirius, and Sirius star system specifically. Okay, so going to the socio-political ingredients of Nazism. A major catalyst in this regard was the expertise of Dr. Frederick de Leach, an Assyriologist in the early 1900s. Recent discoveries and excavations of Sumerian ruins and tombs and the decoding of the cuneiform tablets, such as the Enuma Elish in 1849, had made it so. So it's a newly emerging field. With it all emerged the argument that the Hebrews' creation story in Genesis was a pilfered distortion of Sumer's Enuma Elish. And Frederick de Leach was a spearheading voice on this view. So he's one of the emerging voices in this entire field, and now he's championing this narrative in early 1900s Germany. In his 1902 lectures titled, catch this, Babel and Bible. That's what he called them.
Gotcha.
He's taken the opposite view of me, however, when I talk about Babel versus Bible. He blasted the Old Testament and Judeo-Christian tradition as history's, quote, great deception, end quote, and Yahweh as the source of human troubles. Throughout his lectures and work at large, the Assyriologist championed Babel and its polytheistic tradition as the foundation to a revived golden age for humanity. And this is what other occultists of that time, including Manly P. Hall, and Madame Blavatsky, are going to champion as the New Age. Taking special intrigue in the ancient flying crafts of the Mesopotamian and Hindu deities. Speaking to the fact of his field being a new one, full of promise for the revival of such technologies, he claimed this, and I quote, Of the silent intellectual labors, the world has yet taken little notice. Yet this much is certain, that when the sum total and ultimate upshot of the new knowledge shall have burst the barriers of the scholar's study and entered the broad path, shall have entered our churches, schools, and homes, the life of humanity will be profoundly stirred and be made the recipient of more significant and enduring progress than it has by all the discoveries of modern physical and natural science put together. So far, at any rate, the conviction has steadily and universally established itself that the results of the Babylonian and Assyrian excavations are destined to inaugurate a new epoch, not only in our intellectual life, but especially in the criticism and comprehension of the Old Testament, and that from now till all futurity, the names of Babel and Bible will remain inseparably linked together, end quote. In other words, when this pan-Babylonian and pagan revival catches up to the intelligentsia and goes mainstream, society will be in for a sudden rise in enlightenment, technology, civil progress. That's what he's saying. And I don't know if I explained it, but pan-Babylonianism is so named because it's this idea that all of the pagan traditions came from Babel or Sumer, which I think there might be truth to as far as all of the pagan mystery schools. I think that is true. I think it all kind of came from Nimrod and that fountainhead. Well, whatever came of this foretaste made in 1902 Germany. Over the next 2 decades, we indeed find his words coming to life. So remember, that was in 1902. The widespread revival of pagan literature, solstice holidays, and public festivals literally paraded the streets of Berlin and Munich with a core understanding of pan-Babylonianism, namely that the pan-Germanic gods of Nordic and Celtic myth, typified by their tall, athletic physiques, blue eyes, and blonde hair, were one and the same as the Aryan gods of ancient Sumer, Babylon, Phoenicia, Cana, Egypt, India, and beyond. In paving the way for Nazi, let me insert one quick thing. Have you ever seen those famous color? It's now like an HD color footage of the pre-Nazi parades where you had people parading through these streets in very aesthetic, beautiful gowns and well, that was the closest thing to kind of color television then. That was making this sexy, and those were very calculated and staged propaganda operations to revive, to get the pan-Germanic peoples back in touch with their so-called Aryan or their Aryan roots and their pagan past. Okay, the paving, this was paving the way for Nazism to reconnect with their Aryan ancestors.
Can I ask a question real quick?
From distant worlds.
Why Germany? What was happening in Germany that this thing came through there? Is that just where this particular race of people ended up geographically, or this belief? Like what?
Well, I'm going to give you a more immediate answer. Oh, okay, gotcha. Yes. Well, why Germany? It's this simple, because first of all, the Aryan race ends up concentrating in the Merovingian bloodline in the Middle Ages, which ends up becoming the 33
So
and beyond families of European royalty. So, but we're going to find a new chapter of this blossom, and we've talked about it already in the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds setting up the banking empire in Germany, in Nazi Germany. Excuse me. Pretty much in 1700s Germany. Remember, Frankfurt becomes the fountainhead for Illuminized Freemasonry and banking, making their organizing their cartel. So Germany's right for this. Germany's loaded with secret societies that have been somewhat dormant, and now it's all coming to the surface again. So yes, the Rothschilds have a lot to do with this. With the irony being, and I guess we have to remind people of this, that the great deception here is those who say they are Jews but are not.
Right.
Those who hate Yahweh in the name of Judaism or under the cloaking thereof. Okay. So we see this Aryan enthusiasm beginning to flourish in early 20th century Germany, or spreading like wildfire. What was the gasoline to that wildfire? And I think that's where I ended the notes, because I'm prepared to we can just talk about. And really, the gasoline to the fire were what I just mentioned, the Masonic secret societies that were fomenting. The Masonic secret societies that were, and there were quite a number of them. The main one, actually, because there were a number of them, there came a point where they all kind of came together into a super consolidated nexus of Germany's elite. And they were called the Vril Society. They consisted of members of the Golden Dawn, which was a European secret society, Masonic secret society started by Edward Bulwer Lytton, who I mentioned.
Interesting.
And Aleister Crowley had been part of it. And Aleister Crowley had also started a group called the OTO, and all of these were high-grade masonry, Illuminized masonry, just as Aleister Crowley was himself. So you have this mix of super Illuminized Freemasons all coming together in the Vril Society. And they also had connections to the Rhodes Round Table in England, which was England's version of the Vril, of the Illuminized Freemasonry. And the Vril Society named themselves after that book, or that fictional novel that I mentioned earlier by Edward Bulwer Lytton. Okay. And one of the leaders of the Vril was a woman named, and her team of Vril mediums, Maria Orsic. They are known for their long blonde hair, which they believed to be antenna to their ancestral gods, the Sumerian gods, now located in the Aldebaran star system.
In our galaxy,
which I had mentioned earlier.
Milky Way galaxy, like where is that? Okay.
I can't remember off the top of my head the astronomy of it, but it's astrologically significant.
It's
like in that Orion Taurus star system.
Key,
it's always been astrologically
that they lined
significant.
Up their pyramids with, and the things that they. I know what you mean. Yes, Sirius. Yeah,
Sirius. Yeah. Sirius, and we're going to see that of equal importance to the same Masonic stream later. But this particular Aldebaran, Maria Orsic, it's so fascinating how they came together, the Vril, because it was a man, descendant of the ancient Knights Templar. It was Maria Orsic and a small group of people who first met in 1917, Vienna, at a cafe. And they felt the time had come, a new age, a golden dawn had come to get in touch with the ancient gods again. And that they were going to, the reason the time was right for this was because the technologies promised to avail themselves for amplifying this connection with God, for learning, for creating their old technologies, for, in fact, rebuilding the Atlantean Golden Age is the goal, where they walk side by side with the gods. They're no longer separated by the dimensional veil, but they're face to face. So they get together, this small, and the other people of this group, like a man named Rudolf Serbatendorf, and then there's Guido von List and others associated. They're all very intent on connecting with these gods telepathically to gain the blueprints for UFO technology, for a saucer. And one which works on the concept of dipolarity or diamagnetism, or, to keep it simple, dualism. And they called it the Otherworld Flight Machine. And it's going to take them, it's going to have interdimensional capabilities. And really, all of this goes back to the Kabbalah, or tradition of, we've talked about the Merkaba mysticism, where they want to construct a technological sort of amplifying device that's a Merkaba in itself, that can ascend to other worlds, and ascend to the planets and operate vibrationally between worlds. That's the mechanics. Now, there's really good reason to believe that they did acquire this technology, and that's a whole new story in itself, and that they're going to end up testing prototypes in the 1930s, and that the man who helped develop it was Victor Schauberger. What is really neat is that in that initial group of the Vril in the early 1920s was a man from Dr. Schumann from the, I think, Munich Technical University or something of that sort. And they had Assyriologists who helped translate, because this woman, Maria Orsic, was said to have received the blueprints to this technology, which she didn't totally understand, so they needed people to know what she was getting at. But she was also receiving transmissions, allegedly, from these gods in an old Templar language, but also ancient Sumerian. So they had Assyriologists who were translating the old Akkadian and cuneiform language, some of which I understand she was getting through automatic writing, where she goes into a trance and she's just jotting what comes. And so this is just all that to say how intimately connected this is to their understanding of, to their narrative on prehistory.
Yeah.
And to the bloodlines, and to the Canaanite tradition, etc. So I do want to go back to this point now on Aleister Crowley. I guess this is a good time to insert this. Her, Maria Orsic's claim to channeling these extra dimensional entities from space, who had, in her case, they were tall, blonde, blue-eyed. There was actually, we're finding that this thread of influence comes from, I think you can even say, Aleister Crowley, because part of his group, the OTO, had influenced, as I said, the coming together of the Vril Society in Germany. And Aleister Crowley, now we're going to go back to the early 1900s, when he was starting this group called the OTO, based on and he was a major adept in Freemasonry. The reason he was such a major adept in Freemasonry is because it had been revealed to him, he claims, from his guardian spirits, his mentoring spirits, the pronunciation of the sacred name. Can't remember if I covered this in but it's this whole idea of the tetragrammaton, of how they claim Yahweh is the name of, are the ingredients, the 7 vowels to the created order. Well, he had supposedly been given the secrets to manipulating that name by his spirit guides. So he was suddenly hailed as a prophet by Freemasonry and given all these rewards, and suddenly all these doors opened for him. He was basically given high-level prophetic status in their eyes. But who were those spirit guides? Well, according to Aleister Crowley, and many people are familiar with this story by now, so I'll just minimize it. It was on his honeymoon in Cairo, Egypt, with his wife Rose, when this well-moneyed young man, Aleister Crowley, paid off a guard who's at night who was watching the Pyramid of Giza. He bribed them to be able to spend the night in the Giza pyramid, and they spend the night there and perform a sex magic ritual, which we talked about in a previous episode. Right there in that in that pyramid, which on the spring equinox, a Nimrod holiday, by the way, the same one types they were observing in the Bible in Ezekiel 8, the Gnostics. And that was when there was an astrological orientation to Sirius. So what do you know? That's when he gets in touch with this being called Aiwass, who dictates to Aleister Crowley his vision for the new space age. And it basically goes like this. We, your extraterrestrial gods, are going to raise up an elite of adepts like yourself, Aleister Crowley, and we are going to give you the secrets and blueprints to travel to outer space to complete your deification. And so that was in 1903, 1904, excuse me, just a year after the first plane was invented. So now Aleister Crowley's way ahead of the curve, and now he's looking to space. And he's seeing the conquest of space, as did Pythagoras and the ancients, as the conquest of the ether. Because they didn't view outer space as strictly space, as has become the modern narrative, that it's just space. They believed that it was consciousness, that it was the ether, that it was the higher waters. And I believe there's some truth to it being the higher waters, because we find that throughout the scripture and the Psalms. It's the higher waters, the Shemayim. But anyway, as this vision for space travel is crystallized, it will all be about partnership with these extra dimensional beings from the star systems. And as was the actual instruction to Aleister Crowley, I'm almost quoting verbatim, but it's something like, "Let my servants be few; they will be in control of the many and the known. They'll be in other words, the shadow governors behind the famous people." And that's just how things are going to work. And so we see this exact thinking in the Vril Society in Germany. Oh, and what's fascinating is Aleister Crowley not only set up a lodge, what they call a Masonic lodge of the OTO in Germany, which will contribute to the Vril. He also was like a missionary in a sense, going to the different continents. He set one up in England and Russia, Moscow. He sets one up in the United States. And can you guess where he sets that up in the United States?
Oh.
You guessed it, Jeff. Pasadena, California, where we're going to find NASA's precursor, JPL-4. And Aleister Crowley's disciples, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, are going to be the ones.
Wow.
His disciples are going to be the ones to pioneer that. So we're going to see, when we get to NASA later, whether it's this episode or another, we're going to see that it has two threads leading up to it. One that goes through Nazi Germany, one that goes through Jet Propulsion Lab in California, but both that go back to Aleister Crowley. Yeah. So, and all of which goes back to Freemasonry, and as we are discussing here, these ancient ambitions of Sumer, of Nimrod, of wanting to set their throne above the stars of God. All right. So what's amazing, Jeff, let me just finish with this little teaser. What's amazing, this too will be a shocking statement and hard for people to understand, but I'm going to walk us through it. and I'm going to give them all of the resources they need to verify it for themselves. What's astonishing is that all of the ingredients that went into Nazism, but especially the public propaganda ingredients, especially a love for the occult, such as is now coming through Disney, the History Channel, and others, all of these ingredients are fomenting right under our nose. Nobody seems to be talking about it. I heard a woman the other day who claims to channel extraterrestrials on a very popular podcast. She actually said, and I don't think she even realized what had slipped out of her mouth. She said that the extraterrestrials she channels are from the Pleiades, and when she was asked to describe what they were like physically, she said, tall, blonde, blue-eyed, her words, not mine, like a perfect race.
Well, yeah. and I've seen
and
some.
We're talking a very popular podcast.
I've seen some.
So,
I've been off social media for a while, but back when I was on it more, there's podcasts popping up where guys are talking about how Jesus was a Freemason, and this is becoming, Oh yeah, and I have.
And they say
it with
such certainty as if they know
like
something
some sort of valid information.
Well, it's amazing because that's the narrative, but what they're not telling people, and this is exactly why the Gospels were written the way they were written. When you look at Luke, when you look at Acts, when you look at this when you look at the book of John, Gospel of John, there's this insistence on the epistemological soundness of it, of the witnesses that were present. I, John, the witness of these things, etc. Because they were the first-hand witnesses to Jesus' teaching, and they witnessed him saying, look, there are going to be people who come along. It's just they're predictable at this point. Yeah. And they're going to claim to come in my name to have the goods on me. And those very Gnostic Gospels that would end up happening are like 100, 200 years later. Even though some of those things were fomenting, but they were fomenting guys like Simon Magus. This is all traceable to scoundrels who were very secretive and wanted to gain control over the masses. And I could talk all about that at a future point. Let me drop one quick other bomb, Jeff. But what's astounding about these ingredients that are fomenting under our nose, is that there's a very specific thread of them, which I have managed to trace back to 2017. When the UFO conversation went mainstream with the New York Times in 2017, it was because of a very specific group of people who are known by name at this point, a small group of people, and I've been able to trace them and their CIA programs, because that's where they're coming from, by the way, to the core of 1950s CIA programs. They're basically the second generation of those that were led by the likes of Werner von Braun and Alan Dulles and the Masonic heart of the CIA. And the programs that were the occult and were basically the ones where they brought in all these Nazis for a reason, because they were compatible in their goal of wanting to blend the occult with science in the interest of developing technology fit for the higher bloodlines, as they say.
Sounds good. All right, that was good.
Okay, so we can go there eventually. That's that.